Welcome to Salesology, conversations with sales leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. When you're ready to transform your sales for today's transforming market, we've got you covered. With your host, the queen of cold calling and founder of Salesology, award-winning author, speaker, sales trainer, and coach, Wendy Weiss.
Hi, welcome to Salesology, conversations with sales leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. And I'm your host, Wendy Weiss. I am the founder of Salesology and the Salesology Prospecting Method. I'm also known as the queen of cold calling. And today we have a very special guest. We have Fred Diamond, who is the co-founder of the Institute for Excellence in Sales. And Fred is the host and producer of the award-winning Sales Game Changers podcast. He is the co-founder of the Institute for Excellence in Sales. He's also an advocate for Lyme disease treatment. He's a frequent article contributor to LymeDisease.org. His books, Love, Hope, Lyme, What Family Members, Partners, and Friends Who Love a Chronic Lyme Survivor Need to Know. And I definitely want to ask Fred about that. And Insights for Sales Game Changers, Lessons from the Most Important Sales Leaders on the Planet. And those are both now available on Amazon. So welcome, Fred.
Wendy, it's great to see you. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, thank you. So let's begin at the beginning. What's the backstory? Tell us the Fred Diamond story. We want the inside scoop.
All right. Just as a quick note, I'm from Philadelphia, so it's a great time to be from Philadelphia. By the time this show airs, the Phillies will have won the World Series, but last night they made it into the World Series. I live in Northern Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C. Most of my career was in tech marketing, product marketing, corporate marketing at companies like Apple Computer and Compaq. I went to work for myself in early 2002. Today, they call it fractional, but at the time I was an outsourced chief marketing officer. And even though I was being engaged for helping with marketing strategy, product marketing, et cetera, most companies were hiring me because they had sales problems. And as a marketer, I was uniquely in tune to the fact that companies need to drive in revenue, which is why you and I have connected with Salesology and why I love what you do and the book that you've written as well. In 2012, to meet more sales VPs, I created the Institute for Excellence in Sales. And basically, our mission is to help employers attract, retain, motivate, and elevate top-tier sales talent, typically in business-to-business or enterprise sales. In 2018, it became more fun running and growing the Institute. So I shifted my career towards running the Institute full-time. Started the Sales Game Changers podcast in 2017, mainly to meet more sales VPs. So prior to March 2020, I was literally driving all over the place. For people who are familiar with Washington, D.C., it's built on a beltway. I say I was driving around the beltway, interviewing sales VPs, but you would appreciate this. Sales VPs were my customers. They would join the Institute for Excellence in Sales by doing the podcast at their location. I would be with them in their office for an hour and a half. I got to do a really good show. I used to be a DJ way back in my career, so I'm very comfortable with being behind the mic. And these people, they loved being on my show. I really focused on how they were sales leaders. When the pandemic kicked in March of 2020, we just started doing shows every day and eventually got to the point where we're over 600 episodes now and led to the publication of the book, Insights for Sales Game Changers, Lessons from the Most Important Sales Leaders on the Planet, which, by the way, is available to your listeners. The e-copy is free. And I know you're going to put something in the show notes about that.
Absolutely. So we'll talk more about that a little bit later on. But I have so many questions for you. And the first question that I have is that you said you started the Institute to help sales leaders attract, retain, motivate great employees. That sounds like quite a challenge. How do you do those things?
We do them through our program. So, we started the Institute for Excellence in Sales in 2012. And to be honest with you, the main goal, I had a partner who was a recruiter, And he just wanted to meet more companies that he could sell his recruiting services to. And I wanted to meet more companies that had sales challenges that weren't being helped by the way they were going to market. So that's why we created it in the beginning, was really to get leads for both of our businesses. It picked up. A lot of people liked what we were doing. We brought world-class speakers. Neil Rackham, the guy who wrote Spin Selling, was our second speaker. Jeb Blunt, who wrote Fanatical Prospecting, Anthony Iarino, Mark Hunter, anybody who wrote anything of purport for sales organizations, Jill Conrath, who wrote Selling to Big Companies. We brought them all to DC for a half-day session, and then we would schedule some meetings, and we just started doing programs. People liked what we did. People said, hey, why don't you do something just for women in sales? I know that's something that you're very, very close to your heart. So we created a women in sales program in 2016 that has grown globally. We now have what we call our premier women in sales employer designation, where we recognize companies that are truly great places for women in B2B or enterprise sales to work for. And Wendy, not every company is a great place for women in sales. So those companies we feature on our podcast. We have an event every year called the Women in Sales Leadership Elevation Conference. We invite people from those companies to speak. We're doing some reports on diversity, equity, and inclusion, DE&I, with those companies. So we really team with them to help their companies become great places for not just women in sales, but for salespeople in general.
So I'm curious, what are the criteria for a company to get your designation as a great place for women sales professionals?
So the way that works is we have an application. It's a 10-question application. 7 of the questions are qualitative, and 3 of the questions are quantitative. What percentage of leaders are women? What percentage of sales professionals are women? And we compare them against the other companies that have applied. The first 7 questions are, tell us about the career ascension plans you have for women. Tell us about some of the coaching or mentoring programs that you have for women. When we get the applications, we have an independent judging committee. We tell them what the standards are for each of the questions. They then read the applications, they discuss, and then they assign value. So companies need to reach a certain score. We also, since we deal with so many world-class companies, we have a pretty good idea because of one of our programs we do. It's called the Women in Sales Leadership Forum. It's a leadership development program around the globe. It's held globally for women in sales at companies like Salesforce, Amazon, IBM, Oracle, et cetera. We hear what a lot of companies are doing. So we have a pretty good sense of ones that would reach our standards of excellence for the Premier Women in Sales employer designation. It's not easy. You have to have at least 50 professionals in sales. A lot of the companies have hundreds, if not close to 1,000, some of the larger companies. But it's not like a 3-person insurance agency that has 2 people. You have to truly be a great place for women to want to go choose to work, is one of the criteria that we use.
Okay. So I'm going to switch gears here now for a moment, because I know that you have interviewed so many sales leaders. And so I'm wondering, what do they have in common? Like, what are the commonalities that you see? What are the differences? What makes a sales leader a sales leader?
Yeah, that's a great question. When people ask me, Fred, what is your number one bit of advice for me to have a great sales career? I usually tell them this: really get deep into understanding the needs of your customer. So I'm in the Washington, D.C. area, Northern Virginia, and there's it's a relatively affluent area compared to many others. I think Fairfax County is like the 5th most wealthy county in the country. There's a town here called Great Falls, which has all the monster mansions. And I tell people, if you want a house in Great Falls, those people, they're one of 2 things. They're either lobbyists to the government, right? Or they're the guy who sells Dell computers to the Navy. Or they're the person who leads the team at Red Hat Software selling to the Army. Huge audiences, huge customer bases with big name brands that they're selling to. But the ones that I always ask this question: why have you sold technology to the government or hospitality or financial services? Wendy, they always say the same thing: I'm committed to the passion and the mission. I'm committed to the mission of my customer. I believe that the government We can mock the government all we want, but the military and Department of Defense and Health and Human Services and Department of Energy, I believe in what they're doing because of things that have happened in the sales professional's life. The other thing too is they are students of I like to say the art and science of sales. A lot of people think, yeah, you need charisma. Yeah, maybe, but you really need a mind for sales. You need to think strategically. How can I help the customers? How do I put myself in the customer's shoes? It's not about, you're one of the experts on prospecting. It's not about how much I can say. It's about how much I can get the customer to say, right? And how I'm in tune with clues and signals and really getting deep into understanding what, I hate to use such a broad term as pain, but what problems are they looking to solve? And one of the most interesting things of the last couple of years, Wendy, is that it's not just about what I need to solve. It's about what my customers need to solve and my customers' customers, because of all the issues that have arisen from the challenges of the last 2.5 years. So I say two things: really loving the mission of your customer and believing in it. And secondly, really honing your craft, really becoming excellent at the art and science of the profession of sales.
Well, I love what you just said about becoming so proficient in the art and excellence of the profession of sales, because that's something that I talk about all the time. You've got to learn your craft. And so do you see companies that fall down on the job doing that, helping their sales teams, or do you think companies are getting better at that?
Well, the companies we deal with, again, we're the Institute for Excellence in Sales. So we're lucky. I don't know if we're lucky, if that's the right word, but we deal with some amazing world-class sales organizations. And, to go back to answer your question, a lot of times I'll interview somebody who's had like a nice 30-year career in sales. And now they're a VP at, let's say, Microsoft, right? You don't just wake up one day and say, yeah, I'm kind of done flipping burgers. I now want to be a VP of sales at Microsoft. For all of those types of companies, Hilton, Ford, et cetera, it's a 10, 20, 30-year journey to get to that point. So a lot of the people that we deal with on a face-to-face basis that are partners of the Institute for Excellence in Sales, they are doing great things. They've been doing great things for 10, 20, 30 some odd years. We get a lot of people who are relatively new, who there may be some service companies. We see this with service companies a lot, where they want the consultants or the service provider who are interfacing with the customers to quote unquote sell as they're also providing service. So we also deal with some people, not too many, because we really focus on sales, the sales profession. But we deal with some people who are like, I'm not really in sales. I'm a account executive, or I'm a business developer. Where I am in the DC area, you have a lot of large companies that service the government. So they don't have a lot of quote unquote salespeople per se, but they do have people who are quote unquote BD, and they treat it more as a process as compared to sales. A little bit of insight. We originally were called the Institute for Excellence in Sales and Business Development, IESBD. In 2015, we rebranded because we said, you know what, sales is a noble profession. We're supporting true sales professionals, and we make no bones about it.
And so do you see a disconnect between sales and business development? I mean, Without business development, there generally aren't any sales.
Well, yeah. So a couple of things. You and I probably both like to say, if you have any children or spouses or parents, you're in sales, right? Everybody is in sales, which is true. You've talked about the word persuasion. It's like, if you need to persuade people to do anything, you're really in sales. And we view it as a profession. Again, we deal with people who say, I am truly in sales. Now, take the nuance of business development, which might be, networking, introductions, referrals, if you will. Not that I don't see a disconnect, but in the side that we're dealing on, it's true professional sales with a quantifiable metric. Our number is X for the quarter. My quota is X. My compensation will be X. A lot of cases, people who are quote unquote business development professionals, there's different levels of metrics of their success.
Well, that is true. It depends on what type of business development they're doing. The metric is certainly tied to that. So, because I see it as all the same piece. You can't. It's really hard to sell if you don't do if there's not someone doing the business development piece.
No, I don't disagree. I mean, it's all an interconnected process.
Yeah.
I know that you've spent a lot of time as a professional ballet dancer in places like the Cincinnati and Pittsburgh Ballet. It's not just the one star ballerina who's the whole show. There's costumes and there's stage and there's direction and there's music and there's people who are, selling the tickets and all those things. The same thing in sales. There's so many processes, for sales to happen, especially in the organizations that we deal with, the enterprise. An enterprise deal may take 4 or 5 years, right? It's not just make a phone call and the CIO of American Express is going to say, yeah, I'll take $1 million, $100 million of what you're selling. There's some cases 7, 10, 15 people you need to deal with. And then you throw in macro type things like, I don't know, a global pandemic, things you have to shift. And then you have to train people on things that like you do on prospecting, on getting on the phone and having the right phone skills and making calls the right time and having the confidence to ask the customer to get to the next stage. A lot of people don't realize the complexity that successful companies and people go through to be successful in sales.
I couldn't agree more. Absolutely. And so we're going to pause here for a moment for a word from our sponsor. When I come back, Fred, I want to talk to you some more about some of the successful traits that you see in sales leaders. And also, let's talk about COVID. What's changed before and after? Because I think that a lot has changed. But now we are going to have a word from our sponsor, Salesology 3X Appointments. You know how frustrating and stressful it is when you leave every sales meeting wondering if your sales team knows how to sell because they're not selling and all you ever hear from them are excuses. They blame your marketing. They say you need to do more social media. And they say you need a new website. You know something's wrong. You don't quite know what it is. And you're even starting to wonder if it's you. You don't have a lot of options. You could fire them all and start from scratch. That would be expensive. And you're really sick of waking up in the middle of the night wondering how to fix this. Well, imagine instead that you have an easy-to-use, replicable system that ensures that your team can easily schedule qualified appointments. And imagine that your team is excited and motivated, no more excuses, and you feel good. Salesology 3X Appointments can make that happen. If you're a business owner or a sales manager with an underperforming sales team, let's talk. Click on the link to my calendar in the show notes and schedule a time. And I look forward to meeting you. And we are back with Fred Diamond, who is the co-founder of the Institute for Excellence in Sales. Welcome back, Fred.
Thanks, Wendy. This is great. Thanks. Keep going. I'm excited.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if you can give us some insight on the traits that successful sales leaders have. You mentioned they believe in the mission of their customers. And are there other traits that you see, other commonalities?
Yeah, I would say a couple things. One is they love doing it, right? So again, my show is called the Sales Game Changers Podcast. And even the quote unquote less great show I've done, there's always been an energy because, these are not just that they're successful, but they really, to get to that level of success, you have to put in so much time and energy. You have to think, you have to be good at a couple of things. Internal politics, a lot of great salespeople are great at finding resources. A lot of times they think their mission is to help their customer achieve their goal, whatever it might be. Introductions. I had a CIO on my show of a large government department. And I said to him, what is the value that you see of a great sales professional? And he said, just help me understand how your company operates. He said, how does procurement, how does shipping happen? How does support happen? So that I know that when we work with you, if we work with you, I understand, where we need to go to break through some blocks, if you will. So it's just kind of like the entire process of helping the customer, of understanding their company, understanding the partner ecosystem as well. Who do I need to bring in? Who's going to make a complete solution for me as well? The leaders that the top leaders, they also are passionate about uh, uh, giving back, I guess, is a lot of times they're also involved with charitable organizations that represent their customer, or they're passionate about what they're doing from a charitable perspective as well. The other thing, the final thing is mindset. Mindset kind of gets short shrifted, but when the pandemic kicked in, we started doing a show every Thursday called the Optimal Sales Mindset. And I keep going back to the mindset. If you don't think you're going to sell, you're not going to sell. If you don't think you're providing value, you're not going to provide value. You have to truly have the mindset that you're bringing value and that you're helping your team grow and that you're helping the customer achieve solutions to whatever problems they may have. The moment you shift from that, and there's moments you doubt, you mentioned COVID before. There's been a lot of doubt in a lot of places in this world over the last 2 some odd years. So everybody has struggled with something over the last 2.5 years. Either it's related to health, it's related to managing their family, right? Especially a lot of these people have kids, and the whole shift with that. Women, there was an estimate by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce that 2 million women left the workforce, which is one of the reasons why we created our Premier Women in Sales Employer designation, to recognize the companies that are a great place for women as they return to the workforce.
Yes, absolutely. And so, speaking about COVID, what are some of the changes that you saw? The leaders that you're talking about, they probably, at least starting out, to be as successful as they are, they had a really good mindset for sales and for managing a team. So what happened with them with COVID, and then what were the ramifications of that, and how did it all work out? Tell us the story.
It's interesting as I'm reflecting. The craziest thing here, Wendy, is that it's been 2.5 years, right? In the very beginning, we all were going through this together, and people would say things like, well, I went through 9/11 and I went through the 2008, housing bust. So this will be another opportunity to grow through. And we're going to let our more junior people understand that, like anything else, we will get through this. This too shall pass. Well, it kept going and it kept going, and some industries didn't come back, and it was very, very difficult for a lot of people. A couple things happened from a sales perspective. When we wrote the book, Insights for Sales Game Changers, the way we went about writing the book is we took the 30 most commonly uttered words over all of our Sales Game Changers podcasts, and we found great quotes for each of those words. One of the words that was used time and time again was empathy. Right. And we had to spend time understanding not just how we're doing, but how our people are doing and how our customers are doing. And it was something, to be honest with you, we discovered a lot of people really weren't in tune with the concept of that. Now, to be successful in sales, you have to be empathetic, right? You have to put yourself in the customer's shoes. And we're not talking about sympathy here or other words related to that, but I'm talking about understanding where's the customer coming from, what challenges are they facing, and the great salespeople we talk to have been able to address that. The bigger challenge, though, right now from a sales perspective, is we're still dealing in this hybrid world. Customers haven't all gone back to the office. Now, people are going back to events and they're going back to ball games. Last week, I was at a college football game with 80,000 people, right? But not everyone's going back to the office. You and I are doing this interview, via the web. So there's still and a lot of our members, companies who are members of the IES, our partners, they tell us that they're still struggling with how do we sell when our people don't necessarily want to come back? And also, more importantly, how do we sell to our customers when our customers aren't always back? And we used to go to visit them, and we would stop by, even with security. We would still, stop by or schedule something relatively quick. Now there's still that hesitancy of people fully getting back, and there's kind of a push-pull, and sales leaders that we talk to, I'll be honest with you, they're struggling with that because it's harder managing people when they're not in the office. Even though a lot of inside salespeople and people you deal with have been quote unquote away from the office for a while, well, they still came back when needed, right? Or they were used to the process. We're still getting used to what does that look like selling in that hybrid world.
And are your leaders, are they taking advantage of certainly being able to do everything remotely enables you to have a much larger territory for the sales? They could be selling anywhere to anyone.
No, that's true. I think the bigger challenge, though, is there's two bigger challenges. One is, how are your customers being, right? So a lot of customers are dealing with that same challenge. Because like I said prior to this in the podcast, it's not just you as a sales team dealing with your challenges, and it's not just you dealing with your customers' challenges, as is not atypical over the course of B2B sales, but the customer's struggling with how do they deal with their customer and the customer's customer. So there's a lot of those dynamics that are still in flux and, may not be resolved to our ideal situation for a year or two.
Yeah. What I see is, I think people are running just as fast as they can. And because of that, things just fall through the cracks, and it's harder.
Well, the other thing that we see, and again, we're very sensitive, and we did talk about this in the first half of the show. We created a women in sales program in 2016, related not just to women in sales, but prior to the pandemic, my main customers to be partners with the Institute for Excellence in Sales were VPs of sales. Every day I would wake up, I need to meet 2 sales VPs of sales today. Now we're dealing a lot with recruiters who want to show their company as a great place to work. We're dealing with HR who want to offer benefits to less serviced demographics like women in sales and minorities. And we're also dealing with the DE&I leaders, diversity, equity, and inclusion leaders. Almost every company, again, we deal with business to business enterprise type companies. Almost all of them have a DE&I leader now. So that's become not just because of the COVID, but because of the things related to George Floyd and, the need for minorities to rise. So it's fascinating, the audiences that we're talking to now and what the priorities are. Now we're still the Institute for Excellence in Sales. So we still talk to people like you and try to understand, the things that you're teaching people so they can get better at prospecting, and they can get better at using social tools like LinkedIn, and they can get better at presenting, via the screen, right? It's amazing. I was on a call, I think it was last week, and it was called for 1:00. I was on at 2 minutes to 1, and we didn't get started till 5 minutes after 1 because someone couldn't get the technology to work. Zoom, something we've been using for every day. So not everybody is fully fluent in using the technologies as they should be as well.
That is true. We do some coaching calls, and we have people that can't get onto we do them through Zoom. We have people that can't get onto the coaching calls. And when they do, their camera is someplace else. So we see their ear. It's very, very interesting. But so I have to switch gears here because before we go, we need to talk about something that I know is really important to you, very close to your heart. You've written a book about it, Love, Hope, Lyme, What Family Members, Partners, and Friends Who Love a Chronic Lyme Survivor Need to Know. So could you share a little bit of your story there? How did you get, how did this become so important in your life?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I appreciate you bringing it up. I published both books on August 15th of 2022. Someone very close to me has struggled with Lyme disease, tick-borne illness, for a good portion of this person's life. It was always manageable for the most part. Right in the beginning of the middle of the summer of 2021, this particular person had what we call a flare. The symptoms of the illness of Lyme disease became much more apparent, and eventually needed to seek recovery independently. So I said to myself, I need to understand this disease. I thought that the main care for this particular person was to keep them out of stress, but I got to understand what the disease is The CDC estimates that close to half a billion people, um, half a million people, I should say, every year are newly diagnosed with Lyme. There's probably millions of people who have what's called chronic Lyme disease. Again, when you get to the chronic Lyme stage, there's no cure. Um, there's multiple symptoms that happen when the bacteria from the Lyme disease enters your body. And I began to notice that there weren't too many doctors who understood. Chronic Lyme is not covered by insurance. So family members didn't understand what their loved ones were going through. So I wrote a book called Love, Hope, Lyme. I don't have Lyme disease. I get people who are asking me for advice. The book has been out on Amazon. I refer them to what's called an LLMD, Lyme literate medical doctor, but it's an epidemic. There are millions of people around the world who are struggling with it. Some people, they might have heard of Lyme disease. There's some celebrities who have announced that they have it. Avril Lavigne, a pop star. Some people believe that Justin Bieber has Lyme disease. Film star Alec Baldwin, Yolanda Hadid from the Housewives series has also announced she has Lyme disease as well. So I wrote this book. It's been very well received by the Lyme community, by the chronic illness community. And my mission was just to bring more attention to this for people who are struggling.
So you had told me, correct me if I misheard, but you had said that if it's not caught pretty early, then there's really nothing it's not curable. You said the chronic Lyme disease is not curable. How does somebody know early on if they have Lyme disease? Are there any indicators?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. So there's basically two stages. So let's say you're walking on a path and, there's deer around. What happens is the tick, the average deer, they estimate has between 2,000 to 3,000 ticks on it, right? So the tick leaves the deer, it takes the bacteria out of the deer or a mouse, in most cases, maybe another small mammal, but usually it's a deer. And then the tick, which is like, I can't even show you how small a tick is. Usually you don't feel it, right? But let's say the tick bites you, or even worse, it bites your child, right? So there's two ways to determine it. One is there's what's called a bullseye rash. So it's a very identifiable rash that looks like literally a bullseye. If you see that, you want to get quickly to your doctor or to an emergency room or an urgent care. And what they'll do is they'll put you on antibiotics for a couple of weeks. And that in a very high percentage of cases will kill the bacteria if you quickly start taking the antibiotics. If you don't see a rash, a lot of people don't see the rash, but they feel pain in their joints because the bacteria gets into all of your organs, including your brain. But a lot of times it gets into your joints, so it looks like you have arthritis or maybe neck pain or something. But it's not arthritis, it's the Lyme disease. If you notice that you're fatigued, if you notice that you're dizzy, hopefully more and more doctors are thinking it might be Lyme disease. One of the problems with Lyme is there's not a great test for it. Even the best test has been estimated to be maybe 50% accurate. So if you have those types of symptoms and you get quickly to a doctor or an emergency room or urgent care, and they're attuned enough to know that this may be Lyme disease, it's not food poisoning, it's not a common flu, and they put you on the antibiotics, you should be in good shape. Most of the problem, Wendy, happens when the person was bitten 10, 15 years ago. Maybe they went on a camping trip, maybe they went on a hiking trip with some friends, and they started getting problems a week or 2 or 3 weeks afterwards, and nobody could understand, and doctors discounted it, and emergency rooms weren't aware of Lyme. They would say, well, you need rest or take some Claritin, I don't know, or some type of anti-flu type of medicine. That's not taking care of the problem. You need those antibiotics right away. But if you don't get to it quick enough, unfortunately, you're probably going to have a lot of challenge. You can control the disease and get it into what's called remission. But during COVID, like we talked about, it was a very stressful time for a lot of people. One of the things that happens is you may have a remission where the bacteria isn't really activated, but the COVID circumstance, being locked down, being away from family, having stress, can activate the vaccine. I mean, I don't want to get too political on your show. I don't want us to get, to get us canceled by any of the podcasters, but maybe the vaccine will cause some degree of stress in your body. So then it activates it, and then all the symptoms emerge, and there's 20, 30, 40 symptoms that may emerge.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for doing this really, really important work and getting the word out.
Thank you.
Yeah. So to finish up, I know you have a free gift for our listeners. You mentioned it earlier. It's the e-version of your book. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Actually, I'm making both e-versions available, of the e-version of Insights for Sales Game Changers and the e-version of Lyme disease, Love, Hope, Lyme. I started doing it originally on the Lyme book, but the Lyme book was written for family members and friends who don't understand. And I started seeing on Facebook all these people with chronic Lyme disease saying, my family doesn't understand, because you don't look sick. It's an invisible disease. And friends are leaving me. So I started making the book available for free to Lyme survivors. So the same thing for anybody here who's listening or watching the show, I'll make the Lyme book available for free, and I'll make Insights for Sales Game Changers, the e-version, available to them as well. And one of the cool things about the Insights for Sales Game Changers is we work with great companies. I've gone on and done some book signings at some of our member companies, and both books were written to be read in an hour. And I'd love to have people have their hands on either one.
Okay, so we are going to post the links to both of those books, and that's very generous of you, Fred. Thank you so much. And we're going to post the links to both of the books in the show notes. So as soon as you finish listening to this podcast, go click on the links and grab your copy of the books. And you also have a podcast. You mentioned that a couple of times. I was just interviewed on it. So you want to be sure and listen to Fred's podcast. You want to tell us a little bit about your podcast as well?
Sure. It's called the Sales Game Changers podcast. For people who want to watch or listen to a particular show I did with you, they can go to salesgamechangerspodcast.com/Wendy Weiss, and they could read the complete transcription of the show that we did in 2022. They can also listen to the show. And, it's interesting, Wendy, we get just as many people who read the transcript. Actually, that's not really true. We get 10% of the people who just read the transcript as listen to the show. But if people are consuming the content anyway, we're thrilled. The show with you was fantastic. We talked about some of your insights on prospecting, what people should be doing right now, how to get appointments. One of the fun parts of the show, as you may remember, is we talked about your history as a ballet dancer. And we talked about some of the lessons you learned from the stage. I was struggling with the word. It's stage, right? The
stage, yes.
Yeah, stage. I was struggling. Like I interview a lot of sports athletes, and we talk about the field, the pitch, the rink, but it's the stage. And you gave some great insights into the lessons that you learned about preparation and working well with other people on stage and the other people involved with the production. So we have over 600 shows, and people can go listen and read any of those. And of course, it's available, as they say, wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, etc.
So we will definitely post that link with the show notes as well. So when you're done listening to this podcast, go click on the link, and you can listen to Fred's podcast interviewing me. So thank you, Fred Diamond, co-founder of the Institute for Excellence in Sales. This has been great. And thank you all for listening to the Salesology Conversations with Sales Leaders podcast. And if you have found value in today's episode, think of one person, one business owner, one sales professional that you think might find value in this podcast as well. And please share the link with them. And as always, until we meet again, I am visualizing you surrounded by cash, really large bills.
You've been listening to Salesology, Conversations with Sales Leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. Be sure to follow so that you don't miss a single episode. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review, and be sure to share it with your friends. Tune in every week for more exciting insights and wisdom on transforming sales. And until next time, visualize yourself surrounded by cash. very large bills.